At 0150 on May 19, 1944, Lieutenant Commander Walton Pendleton stood in the cramped Combat Information Center of USS England, watching his sonar operator track a contact moving at 6 knots beneath the black waters north of Bougainville. 37 years old, first war patrol as commanding officer, 0 submarine kills. The Japanese Imperial Navy had stationed 7 submarines in a scouting line across the route to the Marianas. England was a Buckley-class destroyer escort, 77 feet shorter than a fleet destroyer, half the crew, built for one purpose, hunting submarines. But the weapon that made her different sat mounted on her foredeck, 24 spigot mortars arranged in rows. The British called it Hedgehog. The projectiles fired 200 yards ahead of the ship in a circular pattern. Contact fuses. They only exploded if they hit something solid. Depth charges had been killing submarines for 3 decades. Roll them off the stern, set the hydrostatic fuse for estimated depth, hope the submarine was still there when the charges reached detonation depth. The statistics told a brutal story. British forces had launched 5,174 depth charge attacks during the war. 85 confirmed kills. 1 kill for every 60 attacks. By the time the charges sank, submarines had already moved. The explosions disturbed the water so badly that sonar became useless for 15 minutes. Submarines escaped in the chaos. Hedgehog changed everything. Forward throwing. Maintain sonar contact throughout the attack. 65-pound projectiles with 35 pounds of Torpex each. Silent misses. No water disturbance. No lost contact. But the numbers were still being proven. 5% success rate in early trials. Crews didn't trust it. Captains preferred the familiar thunder of depth charges. Pendleton trusted numbers. 1 Hedgehog kill for every 5 attacks versus 1 depth charge kill for every 80. The mathematics were simple. Fleet Radio Unit Pacific had decoded Japanese submarine I-16's transmission 4 days earlier. Destination: Buin. Arrival time: 2200 hours May 19th. The intelligence was perfect. England and 2 sister ships had positioned themselves along I-16's route. Now the contact was real. If you want to see if Pendleton's new weapon actually worked against Japanese submarines, hit that like button right now, and subscribe, because what happens next is insane. Back to Pendleton. The sonar operator called out the range. 1,500 yards. I-16 was diving. Standard Japanese evasion. Radical turns, changing depth. The submarine commander knew he was being hunted. Pendleton ordered the first Hedgehog attack at 1341. 24 projectiles arced through the afternoon sky, splashed into the Pacific, sank at 23 feet per second. Silence. Miss. I-16 had turned. The second attack scored 1 hit at 130 feet. The explosion lifted England's bow. Not enough. Third attack missed. The fathometer revealed the problem. I-16 had gone deep, 325 feet, deeper than Pendleton had estimated. Fourth attack. I-16 turned inside the pattern. Another miss. 1433. Fifth attack. 4 detonations. Then 6. A massive underwater explosion followed. The blast lifted England's stern clear out of the water, knocked sailors off their feet. 20 minutes later, debris began surfacing. Oil, wood, fabric. I-16 was gone. 107 men dead. But Fleet Radio Unit Pacific had decoded another message. 7 more Japanese submarines were stationed in a patrol line north of the Admiralty Islands, and England was sailing straight toward them. Commander Hamilton Haines received the decoded intelligence at Tulagi on May 20th. Japanese 7th Submarine Squadron had deployed 7 Type KO submarines along a line designated NA. The submarines were positioned at precise intervals from Truk Island to the waters west of Manus. RO-104, RO-105, RO-106, RO-108, RO-109, RO-112, RO-116. Each submarine carried 56 crew members. Their mission? Detect American carrier task forces moving toward the Marianas or Palau Islands. Admiral Soemu Toyota needed to know where the Americans would strike next. The submarines were his eyes. Haynes ordered England to join destroyer escorts George and Raby. 3 ships, 7 targets. The odds seemed impossible, but Pendleton had proven something in that first engagement with I-16. 5 Hedgehog attacks, 1 kill. 20% success rate. 4 times better than the early trials. The weapon worked. The crew trusted it now. They had heard the explosions, watched the debris surface, counted the oil slicks spreading across the Pacific. The hunting group departed Purvis Bay on May 21st. Standard line abreast formation. 16,000 yards between ships during darkness. Radar sweeps every 30 seconds. Sonar pinging continuously. The Japanese submarines were maintaining radio silence now. No more transmissions to decode. No more precise coordinates. The hunter-killer group would have to find them the old way. Electronic detection. Patience. Mathematics. Pendleton studied the charts in his cabin. The NA line stretched across Admiral Halsey's previously used routes. The Japanese were predictable. Stationed submarines where American forces had moved before. Hoped the Americans moved there again. But Fleet Radio Unit Pacific had given the Americans an advantage the Japanese didn't know existed. The Americans knew exactly where the picket line was positioned. The question was timing. Submarine patrol patterns were predictable. Surface at night to recharge batteries, dive at dawn, run submerged during daylight, surface again after sunset.
The window for radar detection was narrow. Submarines were vulnerable on the surface, but they were fast. A submarine commander could dive in 60 seconds, be at 200 feet depth in 3 minutes, disappear into the black water. England's crew had drilled for this. Sonar operators could track a diving submarine, calculate depth, estimate speed, predict position. The Hedgehog launchers could be loaded and fired in 90 seconds. 24 projectiles, 130-foot circle, 30 feet deep. Every launch was a gamble. Contact fuses meant certainty. If the projectiles exploded, they hit something. If they stayed silent, they missed. The mathematics were simple but brutal. 7 submarines, 56 men per submarine, 392 Japanese sailors total. 1 Hedgehog attack could kill them all in 9 seconds. At 0350 on May 22nd, George's radar detected a surface contact at 15,000 yards. The first submarine. RO-106 was recharging her batteries. She never saw the destroyer escorts coming. George's searchlight caught RO-106 on the surface. The submarine crash dove immediately. Seawater flooded her ballast tanks. Her bow angled down. Within 90 seconds, she was submerged. George fired Hedgehog at 0415. 24 projectiles splashed into the dark water. Silence. Miss. England regained sonar contact at 0425. Range 1,400 yards. RO-106 was running deep, making radical turns. The Japanese commander knew the tactics. Turn inside the attack pattern, change depth constantly, make the Americans guess. Pendleton didn't guess. His sonar operator tracked every turn, called out depth changes, range, bearing. The data fed directly to the Hedgehog firing solution. First attack, missed. RO-106 had turned 30 degrees during the projectile's sink time. 9 seconds was enough for a submarine to move 150 feet. Second attack at 0501. 24 projectiles formed their circular pattern, sank through the darkness. 3 detonations, then a massive underwater explosion. The pressure wave rolled across the surface. England's hull shuddered. George and Raby felt it 4,000 yards away. At sunrise, the oil slick was half a mile wide. Debris floating, metal fragments, wood. No survivors. Kill number 2. 24 hours after I-16, the 3 destroyer escorts reformed their line, 16,000 yard spacing, continued northeast along the NA line. The next submarine was out there, RO-104, or RO-105, or any of the remaining 5. Japanese submarine commanders maintained strict radio silence, but they surfaced on predictable schedules. Batteries required recharging. Electric motors needed power. Diesel engines needed air. At 0600 on May 23rd,
Raby's radar detected another surface contact. Range, 22,000 yards. The contact dove before identification. The Japanese commander had learned something from Row 106's death. Stay deep. Make them guess your depth. Raby fired 4 Hedgehog attacks starting at 0617. All misses. Row 104 was turning inside the patterns. George tried next. First attack missed at 0717. Second, third, fourth attacks all missed between 0730 and 0810. The Japanese submarine commander was good. Every time projectile splashed above him, he turned, changed depth, made the mathematics impossible. Division Commander Haynes watched England approach for her turn. Pendleton's crew had 2 kills. Raby and George had none. The pattern was becoming clear. England's sonar operators were better, or her Hedgehog crews were faster, or Pendleton's firing solutions were more accurate. Whatever the reason, England was the killer in this hunting group. Haynes radioed 5 words that would become Navy legend. Oh hell, go ahead, England. Pendleton's first Hedgehog attack missed. Row 104 turned. But the second attack at 0834 scored 10 detonations, maybe 12. The explosions merged into one continuous roar. Breaking up noises followed. Metal tearing. Bulkheads collapsing. Then a major underwater explosion 3 minutes later. The submarine's batteries had ruptured. Oil and debris surfaced at 10:45. Kill number 3. 72 hours. 3 submarines. 163 Japanese sailors dead. And England still had 4 more targets ahead. At 0120 on May 24th, George's radar detected Row 116 on the surface. Range 15,000 yards. The submarine dove at 0130. England established sonar contact at 0150. The pattern was repeating. Radar detection, crash dive. Sonar tracking, Hedgehog attack. But Row 116's commander had changed tactics. He went shallow, 150 feet. Most submarine commanders dove deep, 300 feet, 400 feet. Put maximum water between them and the surface. Maximum cushion against explosions. Row 116's commander did the opposite, stayed shallow, made sharp turns. Bet that the Americans would set their firing solutions for deep targets. He bet wrong. Pendleton's sonar operator called out the shallow depth. The Hedgehog firing solution adjusted instantly. First attack at 0214. 3 detonations, maybe 5. Not the massive explosion of previous kills. No battery rupture. Just the sound of 65-pound projectiles punching through pressure hull at 723 feet per second, creating 3-inch holes. At 150 feet depth, seawater enters a submarine at 400 gallons per minute through a 3-inch hole. Breaking up noises weren't loud, just the groan of metal under pressure. The submarine settled deeper. More holes meant more water. More water meant more weight. More weight meant deeper. At 300 feet, the pressure increased. More water flooded in. The temperature inside rose, 200 degrees, 300 degrees. The crew's lungs seared. Within 6 minutes, everyone aboard was dead. The submarine continued sinking. Oil and debris surfaced at 0702 after sunrise. Small quantity. The oil slick expanded over the next 24 hours, several square miles. 56 more Japanese sailors gone. Kill number 4. 5 days, 4 submarines. Word reached Admiral Ernest King at the Navy Department in Washington, Chief of Naval Operations, the man who commanded every ship in the United States Navy. King read the action reports. 1 destroyer escort, 4 confirmed kills, 5 days. Using a weapon most captains didn't trust. King sent a message to 3rd Fleet. Simple, direct. There'll always be an England in the United States Navy. The phrase spread through the Pacific Fleet within hours. England was becoming famous, but fame brought attention, and attention brought new orders. On May 25th, Admiral Halsey wanted England pulled from submarine hunting, reassign her to carrier escort duty, too valuable to risk. 4 kills made her crew experienced. Experienced crews were rare. Protect the asset. Commander Haynes refused. 3 submarines remained on the NA line. Row 105, Row 108, Row 109. England had killed 4 in 5 days. The mathematics said she could kill the remaining 3 in 3 more days. Pull her now and the mission stayed incomplete. Japanese submarines would continue reporting American fleet movements. The intelligence advantage would be lost. Halsey agreed to one more patrol. At 23:03 on May 26th, Raby gained radar contact on Row 108 at 15,000 yards, 110 nautical miles northeast of Seadler Harbor. The submarine dove. England gained sonar contact at 1,650 yards. The Japanese commander made the same mistake as Row 116, stayed shallow, made radical turns, believed the Americans couldn't track him. Pendleton's crew had tracked 4 submarines before this one. They knew every evasion tactic, every depth change, every turn pattern. Raby vectored in for the kill but missed with Hedgehog. Division Commander Haynes gave the order again. Go ahead, England.
23:23. England commenced Hedgehog attack on Row 108. 4 projectiles hit, maybe 6. The explosions came so close together they sounded like one. Row 108 broke apart immediately. No slow flooding, no gradual sinking. The pressure hull ruptured at multiple points simultaneously. The submarine imploded. 56 men died in less than 3 seconds. Faster than they could process what was happening. Kill number 5. 6 days, 5 submarines, 279 Japanese sailors dead. At Japanese Imperial Navy headquarters in Tokyo, Admiral Toyota reviewed the patrol reports. 7 submarines deployed to the NA line, 5 submarines missing. No distress calls, no emergency transmissions, just silence. 1 submarine every 24 hours. The pattern was obvious. Something was killing his submarines. Something fast. Something accurate. Something the submarine commanders couldn't evade. Toyota issued new orders to the remaining submarines. Row 105 and Row 109 received the transmission on May 27th. New patrol depth, 400 feet minimum. New surface protocol, no battery recharging unless absolutely necessary. New evasion tactic, run silent at first detection. No radical maneuvers. Radical maneuvers made noise. Noise gave sonar operators better tracking data. The Japanese were learning, but they were learning from dead men's mistakes. England, George, and Raby continued northeast. The NA line had 2 submarines left, somewhere in 3,000 square miles of ocean. The Americans had the advantage. Fleet Radio Unit Pacific was still intercepting Japanese transmissions. Every radio message gave position data. Every position report revealed patrol patterns. But the tactical situation was changing. 5 kills had depleted England's Hedgehog ammunition. Each attack fired 24 projectiles. 5 attacks meant 120 projectiles expended. England carried 240 rounds total. She had 120 remaining. 5 more attacks, maybe 6 if the crew was careful. And the Japanese submarines were adapting. On May 30th, George detected Row 105 on radar at 21:45. The submarine dove immediately. But this time the Japanese commander did something different. He went deep, 400 feet, then stopped all engines. Complete silence. No propeller noise, no machinery vibration, nothing for sonar to detect. England established contact at 2,200 yards. Weak signal, intermittent. The submarine was barely moving. Sonar operators called it a knuckle, a patch of disturbed water that created false returns. The submarine could be anywhere within 200 yards of the signal. Pendleton faced a choice. Fire Hedgehog at a weak contact and probably miss. Waste 24 precious projectiles. Or wait for the submarine to move. Give up tactical advantage. Let the Japanese commander choose when to run. He chose to wait. 4 hours passed. The submarine stayed silent. Then at 02:30 on May 31st, the signal strengthened. Row 105 was moving.
Battery power was running out. The electric motors needed recharging. The commander had no choice. He had to surface soon or die anyway. But he had one more tactic. One final desperate gamble that might work. Row 105's commander surfaced at 03:15 on May 31st, but not where England expected. The submarine had drifted with the current during those 4 silent hours, moved 3 miles from her last known position. George's radar caught her at 13,000 yards. Wrong direction. Wrong bearing. The hunting group had been searching the wrong grid square. By the time England turned toward the new contact, Row 105 had already crash dove. The Japanese commander had bought himself 90 seconds of battery charging, 90 seconds of diesel engine time, enough to add 10% power to his depleted batteries. Enough to run. England established sonar contact at 03:45. Row 105 was running deep and fast, 6 knots, heading northeast, away from the hunting group. The Japanese commander was good, maybe the best they had faced. He had studied the previous attacks, learned from 5 dead submarines, knew that staying deep and running fast made Hedgehog attacks difficult. The problem was mathematics. Hedgehog projectiles sank at 23 feet per second. At 400 feet depth, projectiles took 17 seconds to reach target depth. In 17 seconds, a submarine moving at 6 knots traveled 170 feet. The firing solution required predicting where the submarine would be in 17 seconds. Predict wrong, and the circular pattern missed completely. Pendleton's first Hedgehog attack at 0405 missed by 200 feet. Row 105 had turned during the projectile's descent. Second attack at 0423 missed by 100 feet. Better prediction, but still wrong. The submarine was varying her speed. 6 knots, then 4 knots, then 6 knots again, making the mathematics impossible. England had fired 48 projectiles. 120 minus 48 equals 72 projectiles remaining. 3 more attacks. Maybe 3.5 if the crew loaded carefully. 3 more chances to kill Row 105 before the ammunition ran out. Division Commander Haynes watched from George. This engagement was different. The previous 5 submarines had died quickly. 2 attacks. 3 attacks maximum. Row 105 had survived 2 attacks, was heading toward a 3rd, maybe a 4th. The Japanese commander was winning the mathematics game. At 0447, Pendleton's sonar operator detected a pattern. Row 105 turned every 4 minutes. 30 degrees to port, then 30 degrees to starboard. Back and forth. The pattern was consistent, predictable. The Japanese commander thought he was being random, but humans aren't random. They fall into patterns. Pendleton adjusted the firing solution, predicted the turn, led the target by 200 feet. Third Hedgehog attack at 0508. 24 projectiles splashed into the Pacific, sank into darkness. 4 detonations, maybe 5. Not the massive explosion of previous kills. RO-105's pressure hull was breached, but not destroyed. The submarine continued moving, flooding, but not sinking. The Japanese commander was executing emergency procedures. Blow ballast tanks, surface, abandon ship, save the crew. But England's 4th attack at 0532 hit with 8 detonations. The submarine broke apart. Emergency blow stopped. The crew never reached the surface. Oil and debris appeared at 0615 after sunrise. Kill number 6. 12 days. 6 submarines. 335 Japanese sailors dead. Admiral Halsey received the report at 3rd Fleet Headquarters. 6 submarines in 12 days. 1 destroyer escort. 1 weapon system that most captains didn't trust. The record was unprecedented, unmatched, impossible to believe. But 1 submarine remained. RO-109. Admiral Halsey issued new orders on June 1st. Pull England from submarine hunting immediately. 6 kills was enough. The destroyer escort had proven the Hedgehog system.
proven it beyond any doubt. Every destroyer escort in the Pacific Fleet would receive updated training, updated tactics, updated firing solutions based on England's action reports. But Row 109 was never found. The submarine had received Toyota's warning after Row 108 died, abandoned her patrol station, ran deep and silent toward Truk. She survived the war, surrendered in August 1945. Her crew learned about the NA Line massacre months later, learned that 6 of their sister submarines had been destroyed in 12 days by one ship, using a weapon they had never heard of. The Presidential Unit Citation arrived in July, one of only 3 destroyer escorts to receive the honor during the entire war. The citation read simply, "For extraordinary heroism in action against enemy Japanese submarines." The words didn't capture what England's crew had accomplished. The mathematics did. British forces had launched 5,174 depth charge attacks during the war, 85 confirmed kills, 1.6% success rate. Hedgehog attacks before England's patrol showed 5% success rate, 26 attacks for every kill. England made her record with far better numbers. 6 submarines, approximately 15 total Hedgehog attacks, 40% success rate, 25 times more effective than depth charges, 8 times more effective than the Hedgehog average. The weapon system became standard on every destroyer escort by September 1944. Training protocols changed across the fleet. Sonar operators studied England's tracking techniques. Hedgehog crews practiced England's loading procedures. Fire control officers memorized England's firing solutions. In the Atlantic, Hedgehog sank 47 German U-boats by war's end. 268 attacks, 47 kills, 17.5% success rate. Still the best anti-submarine weapon of the war. But no ship matched England's 12-day record. Not in the Atlantic, not in the Pacific, not in any theater. Lieutenant Commander Pendleton received the Navy Cross in August, single decoration for 6 submarines. The citation mentioned his tactical brilliance, his crew's discipline, the weapon system's effectiveness. But it didn't mention the thing that mattered most: mathematics. Pendleton had trusted numbers when other captains trusted tradition. He had calculated firing solutions while others relied on experience. He had predicted submarine movements while others guessed. The numbers had been right. England continued escort duty through summer 1944. Convoy protection, carrier screening, anti-submarine patrols. She never found another submarine. Never fired Hedgehog in combat again. On October 31, 1944, kamikaze aircraft hit England off Leyte Gulf. The bomb penetrated the forward engine room, killed 37 crew members, wounded 25 more. The damage was catastrophic. Repairs would take 6 months, cost more than building a new ship. The Navy decided England wasn't worth saving. She was towed to Manus Island, stripped of useful equipment, sold for scrap. In November 1946, cut apart in a salvage yard. The ship that had sunk 6 submarines in 12 days ended her life as razor blades and tin cans. But the record stood, still stands today. No ship has matched it. 80 years later, England remains the greatest submarine killer in naval history. Walton Pendleton survived the war, promoted to commander, given command of an escort division in Alaska, spent the final year of the war hunting Japanese submarines in the North Pacific. Never found any. The war ended in August 1945. Pendleton retired from the Navy in 1961 after 34 years of service. Died in 1973 at age 66. Buried at Arlington National Cemetery. His gravestone mentions the Navy Cross. Doesn't mention the 6 submarines. Doesn't mention the 12 days that changed naval warfare. The Navy kept its promise. Sort of. In October 1960, guided missile destroyer leader USS England was commissioned. Hull number DLG-22. Later reclassified as CG-22. Served from 1962 until 1994. 32 years. Longer than the original England lasted. But when CG-22 was decommissioned,
The name England disappeared from the fleet. Admiral King's promise broken. There hasn't been a USS England since 1994. The original Hedgehog launcher sits in storage at the National Museum of the United States Navy in Washington, D.C. Rusted. Forgotten. Most visitors walk past without noticing. The placard mentions the weapon's success rate, doesn't mention England, doesn't mention Pendleton, doesn't mention the 12 days that proved the system worked. Japanese records recovered after the war confirmed the 6 kills. I-16, RO-106, RO-104, RO-116, RO-108, RO-105. Each submarine's final position matched England's attack coordinates exactly. 335 sailors confirmed dead. The Japanese Navy never understood what killed them so fast. Their action reports mentioned explosions above, flooding below, death within minutes. But nobody survived to describe the circular pattern of projectiles, the contact fuses, the forward-throwing mortars that maintained sonar contact throughout the attack. The British developed Hedgehog. The Americans perfected it. England proved it. But history remembers aircraft carriers, battleships, fleet destroyers, the big ships with the big guns. Destroyer escorts were expendable, cheap to build, easy to replace. 700 built during the war,
Most scrapped within 5 years of peace.
England lasted 2 years after the war ended, scrapped at age 2.5. The ship that sank 6 submarines in 12 days wasn't worth the metal she was made from. If this story moved you the way it moved us, do me a favor, hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every week. Stories about sailors who trusted mathematics over tradition. Real people, real heroism. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from. Are you watching from Texas, Germany, Australia, United States? Our community stretches across the entire world. You're not just a viewer. You're part of keeping these memories alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if someone in your family served. Just let us know you're here. Thank you for watching. And thank you for making sure USS England and her crew don't disappear into silence. These men deserve to be remembered. And you're helping make that happen.
In the summer of 1942, somewhere in the Libyan desert east of Tobruk, a Panzer IV tank began to slow. The driver felt it first. The engine that had roared to life at dawn was now struggling, laboring against something invisible. The crew inside could hear the mechanical groaning, the way the water in the cooling system began to boil. The temperature inside the tank climbed steadily. They had nowhere to pull over. They were deep in hostile territory. And the machine that had been built to conquer nations was being conquered instead by an enemy Germany had not anticipated. Not an enemy that fired shells or carried rifles, an enemy made of sand, dust, and heat. What they couldn't have known was that this scene was being repeated across the desert thousands of times over. That the most advanced tank force in the world was systematically being destroyed, not by British armor or American firepower alone, but by the combination of environmental factors that German engineers had not adequately prepared their machines to face. The conventional story about the North African campaign focuses on personalities. It celebrates Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, a tactician of genius who seemed to win every engagement. It highlights the British recovery under Bernard Montgomery. It credits logistics and supply lines as the ultimate deciding factor. And all of this is true. But this narrative obscures a fundamental technical crisis that was destroying the German war effort in Africa even as Rommel was winning battles. German tank engines were failing. Not occasionally, not under extreme circumstances. Failing at a catastrophic rate that no logistics network could overcome, and no amount of tactical brilliance could compensate for. The desert revealed a fundamental truth about German tank design, that it was optimized for one kind of environment, that it was fragile when removed from that environment, and that Germany had no way to fix it. The problem began with a choice made years before the first German tank ever rolled into North Africa. Back in the 1930s, when German engineers were designing the future Panzer Force, they faced a fundamental question: should tanks be powered by air-cooled engines or by water-cooled engines? This was not a trivial choice. It was a decision that would ripple through the entire German rearmament program and determine whether tanks could function in environments far beyond what anyone had initially planned. The two approaches represented fundamentally different philosophies. Air-cooled engines, the kind that had been proven reliable in aircraft, would dissipate heat through metal fins exposed to air, with no need for radiators or cooling fluid. Water-cooled engines, a proven design for automobiles, would use pressurized liquid to transfer heat away from the engine block. Each approach had advantages and disadvantages. Each approach had passionate advocates within the German military establishment. Hitler and Ferdinand Porsche, the head of the Tank Commission, considered air-cooled engines to be the superior choice for military vehicles in general. The advantages were clear. Air-cooled engines had no problems with boiling or freezing water in radiators. They could operate in varied climate conditions, from African desert to Russian steppes. They were simpler in some ways and more robust in others. Porsche advocated for air-cooled designs not specifically for North Africa, but as a general solution to the problem of operating tanks across multiple climate zones. When Porsche was eventually tasked with designing a new heavy tank, the VK45.01 Porsche, he incorporated air-cooled engine concepts as part of his design philosophy. But the Ordnance Department, the branch of the German army responsible for weapons production, preferred water-cooled engines for a different set of reasons. Water-cooled engines had been the standard for German cars and trucks for decades. The manufacturing infrastructure existed. Skilled workers understood the requirements. The tooling was already in place. But there was another reason. According to tank designer Nipkamp, air cooling requires more labor-intensive production due to the turning of the ribs that dissipate heat through the aluminum fins. If the cylinders with fins are made cast, then the cooling efficiency decreases. This means the engine power decreases as well. Water cooling allowed the Ordnance Department to extract more horsepower from a given displacement. More power meant more capable tanks, and more power meant the Ordnance Department could deliver vehicles that performed better on the testing grounds and in the eyes of military evaluators. The choice was made in favor of water cooling. The Maybach company, which had earned its reputation building luxury engines for Rolls-Royce competitors before the war, would become the sole supplier of tank engines to the German army. And Maybach, like the Ordnance Department, preferred water-cooled designs. The Hull 120 was the most common power plant, a V12 engine producing 296 horsepower. It powered Panzer IIIs and Panzer IVs across the entire campaign. It was a capable engine. It was reliable in Europe, and it was completely unsuited to the desert. When the first panzers arrived in North Africa in the spring of 1941, no one fully understood what they would face. The climate was foreign, the terrain was foreign, the dust was foreign. Rommel had arrived in Tripoli with clear instructions to help the Italians defend against British attacks. He was not expecting to launch major offensive operations. He was certainly not expecting the environment itself to become a weapon. But by the summer of 1941, the environment was already wreaking havoc on German equipment. The heat in the Libyan and Egyptian deserts was unlike anything German crews had experienced. Daytime temperatures regularly exceeded 130 degrees Fahrenheit. When the sun was at its peak, the interior of a tank could reach 110 degrees or higher, turning the steel box into an oven that was barely survivable for extended periods. But heat alone might have been manageable. Humans can survive in heat. Machines are not so flexible. The problem was that water-cooled engines require liquid to dissipate heat. And in the desert, the temperature of that liquid rises rapidly. The radiators on the Maybach engines were designed with certain assumptions. They assumed ambient temperatures below 100 degrees Fahrenheit. They assumed the engine would not need to operate at sustained high power for hours at a time in stationary positions. They assumed a certain amount of airflow over the radiator fins to ensure maximum heat transfer. The desert violated every one of these assumptions. And then there was the dust. The dust of the Sahara is not like the dust of cities or fields. It is incredibly fine. A single grain of sand can be smaller than the width of a human hair. When the wind blows across the desert, these grains become suspended in the air. They infiltrate every gap, they block every filter. They coat every surface. A cloud of Saharan dust, what the locals called the sirocco or Ghibli wind, could appear with almost no warning. Visibility would drop to a few meters. Sand would coat eyes and lungs, and every piece of mechanical equipment would be suffused with abrasive particles. The consequences for tank engines were severe. The German tanks used standard air filters designed for European conditions. These filters could handle the dust loads of France or Russia. They could not handle the dust loads of North Africa. Dust would accumulate on the filter elements. The filters would become clogged. But crews could not simply stop fighting to clean filters. They were in combat. They needed their tanks. And so they kept operating them. What happened next was catastrophic. When air filters become clogged, less air reaches the engine. The engine begins to run rich, with too much fuel and not enough oxygen. The fuel burns incompletely. Carbon deposits accumulate on the piston rings. These rings, which are supposed to create a seal between the piston and the cylinder wall, become coated with abrasive carbon. As the piston moves up and down, thousands of times per minute, these carbon deposits cause the rings to score the cylinder walls. The walls become scratched. They begin to leak. The leak allows hot compressed air to escape past the piston. Pressure in the cylinder drops. Power output decreases. The engine becomes less efficient. And most crucially, the damaged cylinder walls can no longer maintain a seal. Oil that should lubricate the piston instead leaks out past the damaged walls. But that is only the beginning of the cascade of failure. If some dust escapes the filters and reaches the engine oil, the oil becomes contaminated with abrasive particles. These particles circulate throughout the engine. The engine oil pump circulates oil to every bearing, every journal, every moving surface. If the oil contains sand, the sand circulates with it. Every rotating shaft begins to be slowly abraded by the abrasive particles. The sand scores the bearing surfaces. It scores the crankshaft. It damages every surface the oil touches. The cumulative effect of this damage is that engines begin to break down, pistons seize, bearings fail, connecting rods fracture, and the engine simply stops running. Sometimes it stops suddenly, sometimes it fails slowly, with progressively deteriorating performance. But either way, the result is the same. The tank is immobilized. The rate of engine failure became catastrophic. Reports from the North African campaign indicate that engine lifespan in desert conditions dropped dramatically compared to European standards. While specific quantified data varies by source and tank type, anecdotal reports from maintenance depots and unit logs consistently document that engines were failing at rates far exceeding what German designers had anticipated. A tank that should have been operational for weeks or months was breaking down after just a few days of combat operations. The cumulative effect was that Germany could not maintain adequate operational strength despite the quality of individual tanks. Consider what this meant for the German war effort in North Africa. Rommel had arrived with a modest force. He had the 15th Panzer Division and the 21st Panzer Division, plus some Italian armour. His initial strength was measured in hundreds of tanks, not thousands, but these were quality tanks. They were operated by crews trained in Germany. They had proven themselves effective against British armour. Rommel's genius as a tactician meant that he could use these tanks to achieve victories against numerically superior British forces. Again and again he would concentrate his armour at decisive points and overwhelm local British defences. But victory on the tactical level could not compensate for catastrophic failures at the mechanical level. Every time a Panzer IV engine failed, the tank had to be recovered and towed back to maintenance depots. The depot mechanics would have to remove the damaged engine, but where would they get a replacement? The engines were manufactured in Germany. They were shipped across the Mediterranean to North Africa. The British were sinking ships. The Mediterranean was becoming increasingly dangerous. The supply of replacement engines was dwindling, and the demand for replacement engines was exploding. In the summer of 1942, Rommel reported that his tanks were becoming inoperative, not due to enemy action, but due to mechanical failure. At one point, he claimed that only half his tank strength could be kept operational. The other half were in maintenance depots, waiting for spare engines that never arrived. 50% loss of combat power due to mechanical failure. This was worse than losing vehicles to enemy fire. At least vehicles destroyed in combat could be replaced with vehicles sent from Germany. But vehicles broken down due to engine failure required spare engines that the supply system could not provide. The fundamental problem was that no one in Germany had anticipated that tank engines would fail at this rate. German engineers had tested engines in Europe. They had tested them in reasonable conditions. No one had conducted systematic testing in the Sahara, and if they had, they might have discovered the truth far earlier. The Maybach engines were simply not adequate for desert operation. They needed different cooling systems. They needed different air filtration. They needed regular maintenance that exceeded what was practical in a combat environment. They needed environmental controls that did not exist in 1942. What made this situation even more maddening was that the solution existed. It had existed even before tanks arrived in North Africa. Air-cooled diesel engines could have solved the problem. Porsche had been advocating for air-cooled engines for years. At a meeting of the Tank Commission in July of 1942, Porsche stated that Hitler had once again ordered the development of air-cooled diesel engines for all types of military vehicles. Production was planned to start in 1943. A working committee was formed made up of Daimler-Benz, Klöckner Humboldt Deutz, Krupp, Maybach, Tatra, Simmering and Stier. They were supposed to share their experience and work collectively toward the goal of air-cooled diesel tanks. But nothing happened. By 1944, air-cooled diesel engines were still not in production. By 1945, they still had not been deployed in German tank forces. The war ended with German main battle tanks exclusively equipped with water-cooled gasoline engines. While Germany did use Tatra air-cooled diesels in some trucks and armored vehicles, the critical main battle tank fleet remained dependent on Maybach water-cooled designs. The reason for this failure was not technical. The technical solutions existed. The reason was institutional. It was political. It was economic. Maybach had a monopoly on German tank engine production. Changing to air-cooled diesel engines would have destroyed that monopoly. Changing to air-cooled diesel engines would have required switching to Tatra diesel engines manufactured in Czechoslovakia or Steyr designs or other alternatives. Changing to air-cooled diesel engines would have meant surrendering the enormous profits that Maybach was making from its exclusive supply contract. And so Karl Maybach, the head of the company that bore his family name, used all his influence to prevent the switch to air-cooled diesel engines. He sent letters to the Tank Commission. He lobbied military officials. He argued against diesel engines on the grounds that Germany did not have adequate supplies of diesel fuel. He promoted his own designs, the HL64 and the HL234, both of which were water-cooled gasoline engines. He fought to preserve the Maybach monopoly, and he won. For the duration of the war, German tanks were powered by water-cooled Maybach engines, and for the duration of the war, those engines failed catastrophically in any climate other than temperate Europe. The consequences for the German war effort in North Africa were staggering. Rommel could not maintain enough operational tanks to conduct sustained offensive operations. He could win individual battles. He could achieve tactical victories. He could destroy British armour in engagements where he had local numerical superiority. But he could not sustain a campaign because he could not keep his tanks operational. Every time his mechanical situation improved due to arrival of replacement engines, it would deteriorate again. Every time his tanks were ready for offensive operations, some portion of them would require maintenance. Mechanical reliability of engines became a critical, compounding factor in his strategic constraints. Fuel shortages, air superiority, and logistics limitations all combined to restrict his options. The problem was made worse by the fact that Germany was simultaneously trying to operate in two completely different climates. While tanks in North Africa were struggling with heat and dust, tanks on the Eastern Front were struggling with cold. Water-cooled engines face problems in both extremes. They overheat in summer and they freeze in winter. A tank sent to the Eastern Front in January could have its radiator freeze and crack. The solution was to use antifreeze, but antifreeze had to be drained and replaced when temperatures rose. The solution was complex. The solution was labor-intensive. The solution was expensive, and it applied only to one climate. German tanks had no way to operate effectively in both the desert and the Arctic. They had to choose one or the other, and the choice was made based on geography and strategy. Germany was primarily focused on the Eastern Front. The conquest of Soviet territory was the strategic objective. North Africa was secondary, a diversionary theatre designed to help the Italian ally and to deny the British the Middle East. When resources were scarce, which was increasingly the case as the war went on, those resources went to the Eastern Front. The North African campaign did not get the replacement engines it needed. It did not get the improved air filters and cooling systems that might have extended engine life. It got what was left over after other theatres were supplied. By 1942, it became clear to everyone involved that the Desert Campaign could not be sustained, not because Germany lacked tactical skill, not because Britain was stronger, but because Germany lacked the logistical capacity to keep tanks operational in a hostile climate. The supply lines were already stretched. The shipping situation was deteriorating. Every transport ship lost meant fewer replacement engines arrived. Every battle meant more tanks damaged. By the middle of 1942, Rommel was essentially fighting a losing battle against both the British and the desert. The British were steadily improving their position. They were receiving better tanks, they were building up supplies, and they were using those supplies effectively because they had logistics systems designed to support extended operations in Africa. The American Sherman tanks that began arriving in the British forces in 1942 were not superior to German tanks in terms of armour or firepower. Many Shermans were inferior to Panzer IVs in terms of protection and gunpowder, but the Sherman was powered by a radial aircraft engine, the Continental R975, that was proven reliable in hot climates. American tank crews could keep Shermans operational because the engines did not fail at the rate that Maybach engines failed. American mechanics could actually repair Shermans in the field. American supply lines could deliver the spare parts that were needed. The result was that the British, equipped with American tanks powered by American engines, could maintain a higher percentage of their tank force in operational status than the Germans could. This created a strategic imbalance that compounded other disadvantages. Montgomery could deliberately choose to build up supplies, train his troops, and wait until he had overwhelming advantage before attacking. He could do this because he knew his tanks would still be operational when he was ready to attack. Rommel could not afford to wait. He had to attack when he had tanks available. If he waited, more tanks would break down. If he attacked without adequate preparation, he would lose. The mechanical reliability of engines became a critical compounding factor, but not the only constraint. Fuel shortages, air superiority, port capacity limitations at Tripoli and Benghazi, and British naval dominance in the Mediterranean all combined to limit Rommel's strategic options. The engine failures were devastating because they occurred within an already fragile logistical system that was stretched to its breaking point. The culmination came at El Alamein in October 1942. Montgomery attacked with 1,440 tanks, of which more than 1,000 were in operational status. Rommel had only 500 tanks, of which fewer than 300 were operational. The tanks were broken down. They were in maintenance. They were waiting for replacement engines that had not arrived. Some historians attribute the British victory to Montgomery's superior tactics or his courage. Others attribute it to British preparation and patience. These factors mattered, but the fundamental reason that Montgomery could afford to have 1,400 tanks while Rommel had 500 was that British tanks worked. German tanks broke, and the desert had revealed to the entire world that the vaunted German mechanized force was operating with fundamentally unsuitable equipment. By 1943, the situation had become untenable. The Germans retreated from North Africa. The campaign that had begun with promise in 1941 was over. Germany had lost 250,000 troops. It had lost aircraft. It had lost tanks. And it had lost the initiative in the Mediterranean. The British and Americans now had a staging ground for operations in Sicily and Italy. The Axis was beginning to fall apart. And it had all begun with an institutional choice made years earlier, the choice to use water-cooled Maybach engines instead of air-cooled diesels, the choice to sacrifice performance in extreme climates for the sake of maintaining a corporate monopoly, the choice that would resonate through German military procurement for the rest of the war. The irony was bitter. Germany had some of the finest engineers in the world. The solutions to the engine problem existed. Porsche knew what needed to be done. Tatra had diesel engines that could have been used. Steyr had designs that could have worked. But none of these alternatives could be implemented because Maybach had the contracts. Maybach had the political influence. Maybach had the ear of the Tank Commission. Maybach had convinced German leadership that water-cooled gasoline engines were the only acceptable choice, and Germany paid the price for that institutional inflexibility. The lesson of the North African campaign extends far beyond the technical details of tank engines. It is a lesson about industrial organization. It is a lesson about the dangers of monopoly. It is a lesson about what happens when political influence matters more than technical solutions. By 1942, German tanks had begun to demonstrate advantages in firepower and crew training, though armor protection remained comparable to British equivalents. But the entire system was built on foundations of water that boiled in the heat, and when that fundamental vulnerability was exposed, all the tactical skill in the world could not compensate. The strategic consequence was that Germany lost the initiative in the Mediterranean. Germany lost territory. Germany lost the ability to support Italy. And ultimately, Germany lost the war. The chain of causation is complex. No single factor determines a war. But the steady attrition of the tank force in North Africa, the inability to maintain adequate operational strength, the mounting losses of trained crews, the damage to German prestige, all of these consequences flowed directly from the choice to use inappropriate engines in a hostile environment. When the war ended in 1945, German industry was finally on the verge of solving the problem. The Maybach monopoly was breaking. Air-cooled diesel engines were beginning to be tested. Porsche designs were being implemented, but it was too late. Germany was facing defeat on multiple fronts. The resources were no longer available to re-engine the entire tank force, and the political will to make such a change had vanished. Germany ended the war using the same basic water-cooled engines that had failed it in the desert nearly 5 years earlier. The most poignant irony is that the Tiger tank, which was originally envisioned with an air-cooled engine for potential deployment in extreme climates, was ultimately equipped with a Maybach water-cooled engine. Porsche had been right about the principle of what was needed, but Maybach had been more influential. The Tiger P, with its air-cooled diesel engine, remained a prototype, but it was plagued by its own technical problems. The petrol-electric drive was complex and unreliable. The suspension was prone to failure. The tank itself had a tendency to catch fire. It was never a perfect solution, merely a different set of problems. Instead of the Tiger P, Germany produced the Tiger I with a water-cooled Maybach engine. It was superior to tanks it faced in combat in terms of raw firepower and armor protection, but it still suffered from the same cooling problems in hot climates. It overheated in North Africa. It overheated in southern Russia. It overheated anywhere. The ambient temperature exceeded what its designer had anticipated. The historical record shows that in every theater where German tanks faced extreme temperatures, the engine reliability suffered. In Russia, the water froze and cracked radiators. In the desert, the water boiled and engines overheated. The solution of using air-cooled diesels would have mitigated both problems. But Germany never implemented the solution, not because the technical knowledge did not exist, but because the institutional will did not exist. Because Maybach was more powerful than Porsche. Because corporate interests were more important than military needs. Because Germany had made a fundamental error in its industrial organization and paid the price for that error with lives and territory, and ultimately with the war itself. The desert had spoken. It had revealed the fundamental weakness in German tank design, and that weakness contributed, in some measure that can never be fully quantified, to the defeat of the German war effort. The engines that had been designed for Europe had failed in the desert, and Germany had no way to fix the problem. That simple fact, buried in technical reports and maintenance logs, was a small but significant part of the story of why Germany lost World War II.